I always believed that a house carried the memories of those who lived in it. My grandmother's house was no exception. Every creaking floorboard, every dented doorframe, every sunlit window had a story to tell. As a child, I spent summers running through its hallways, playing hide-and-seek in its sprawling garden, and sitting by the fireplace as Grandma told tales of our ancestors. When she passed away, the house became mine, not just in spirit, but legally. It was a quiet inheritance, settled in private, as per her wishes. I never thought much about it at the time. My family had their own homes, their own lives. No one had expressed interest in the house, and I had assumed they knew it belonged to me. Life, however, had other plans. One evening, I returned from work to find a flurry of unread messages on my phone. My sister, my uncle, even my cousin, each message carried an air of urgency. Confused, I called my sister first. "Jake, you need to come over," she said, her voice tense. "It's about Grandma's house." My heart skipped a beat. I had been meaning to visit, to check on the old place, but work had kept me busy. "What about it?" There was a pause. "We sold it." The words didn't make sense at first. "You what?" "We sold it," she repeated. "A buyer came through, made a great offer. We thought it was the right thing to do." I felt a slow, cold weight settle in my stomach. "You thought it was the right thing to do?" I repeated, my voice barely above a whisper. "Jake, we didn't know," she said, almost pleading now. "We thought it belonged to all of us." I sank into my chair, gripping my phone tighter. They had sold the house. My house. And they had no idea it was never theirs to sell. I sat there, gripping my phone so tightly my knuckles turned white. A rush of emotions flooded my mind: anger, disbelief, sadness. I opened my mouth to speak but found that words failed me. How could they not have known? Who handled the sale? I asked, my voice unnervingly calm. There was hesitation on the other end of the line. Then my sister sighed. "Uncle Robert took care of it. He found a real estate agent, handled the paperwork, everything. The buyer is some investor, he wants to tear it down and build something new." Tear it down. The words hit me harder than anything else. I could see it now: bulldozers crushing the garden where I'd once played, flattening the walls that had heard my grandmother's laughter, erasing every piece of history that house held. "I'm coming over," I said, ending the call before my sister could protest. The drive to my uncle's house felt like an eternity. My thoughts raced, piecing together everything that must have happened. Grandma had left the house to me in her will. But no one had asked, no one had checked. They had just assumed. When I arrived, the whole family was there. My sister, my uncle, a few cousins. The tension in the room was thick. "Jake," Uncle Robert said, standing up as I entered. "I know you're upset, but let's talk about this rationally." "Rationally?" I scoffed. "You sold my house without even telling me." My sister looked genuinely guilty. "We thought it belonged to all of us. Grandma never told us otherwise." I took a deep breath. "She did. Just not in a way you would have noticed." I reached into my pocket, pulling out the one piece of proof that would change everything: the will. And just like that, the room fell silent. I placed the will on the coffee table, watching as their eyes darted to the document as if it were something dangerous. "This is Grandma's will," I said, my voice steady but cold. "She left the house to me. Legally. There was never any we in this decision." Uncle Robert was the first to speak. That can't be right," he muttered, reaching for the papers with trembling fingers. He skimmed through, his face paling as he read the unmistakable words: "I leave my house and property to my grandson, Jacob Whitmore." A heavy silence followed. My sister, sitting beside him, exhaled sharply. "Oh my God," she whispered. "We really messed up." "Messed up?" I repeated, incredulous. "You didn't just mess up, you sold something that wasn't yours to sell. And now, some investor is going to bulldoze Grandma's house." The weight of my words sank in. My cousins looked away, ashamed. My uncle rubbed his temples as if that would somehow undo everything. "We can fix this," my cousin Derek finally said. "We'll just call the real estate agent, explain the situation." "And then what?" I snapped. "Hope the buyer just gives the house back out of the kindness of his heart? Real estate doesn't work like that." Uncle Robert finally looked up. "The sale hasn't been finalized yet," he admitted. "The buyer hasn't signed the final paperwork, but he's set to in 2 days." 2 days. A small ember of hope flared inside me. There was still time. "I need his contact information," I said, standing up. "I'm going to fix this myself." Uncle Robert hesitated before nodding. "I'll get it for you," he said quietly. As I waited, I felt the full weight of what had happened settle on my shoulders. My family, whether through ignorance or carelessness, had almost erased my grandmother's legacy. Now, it was up to me to save it. And I only had 48 hours to do it. The next morning, I sat in my car outside a sleek, glass-walled office building, gripping the slip of paper that held the name and number of the buyer. Elliot Graves. A name I had never heard before, but one that now held the power to determine my family's legacy. I had tried calling him first. No answer. So now, I was here. I stepped inside, my heart pounding. The receptionist gave me a polite but dismissive smile when I asked to see him. "Do you have an appointment?" "No, but it's urgent." She sighed. "Mr. Graves is very busy." "Please," I said, leaning forward. "Just tell him it's about the Whitmore house. He'll want to hear this." She hesitated, then picked up the phone. A short, hushed conversation followed before she looked back up at me. "3rd floor. His assistant will meet you." I exhaled, my hands tightening into fists as I walked toward the elevator. When I entered Elliot Graves' office, I knew immediately that he was the kind of man who made decisions quickly and without second-guessing. He was in his late 40s, with sharp eyes and a confidence that made him seem untouchable. "I assume you're here to talk me out of the sale," he said before I could even sit down. I hesitated. "I didn't come to argue. I came to ask for your understanding." His expression didn't change. "I bought that house fair and square." "Not exactly," I countered. "My family sold it without realizing they had no right to. The house was left to me in my grandmother's will. They made a mistake." For the first time, Elliot leaned back in his chair, considering my words. "And what do you expect me to do about that?" I swallowed. "You haven't signed the final paperwork yet. I'm asking you to back out of the deal." He let out a short, humorless laugh. "And why would I do that? I got it at a great price. It's prime land for development. I'll buy it from you," I said immediately. His eyebrows lifted. "For how much?" I faltered. I had barely enough savings for a down payment, let alone the full price. I'd have to figure that out." He smirked. "That's what I thought." Panic clawed at my chest. I was losing him. "I grew up in that house," I said, forcing myself to hold his gaze. "My grandmother spent her last years there." "I know to you, it's just a piece of land, but to me, it's everything." For a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of something in his eyes. Then, he exhaled sharply. "I don't do charity, kid. But I'll tell you what," he picked up a pen and tapped it against his desk. "If you can match what I paid for it by the end of the week, I'll walk away." The end of the week. That gave me 5 days. I had no idea how I was going to come up with that kind of money. But I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to let my grandmother's house slip away without a fight. The moment I walked out of Elliot Graves' office, reality came crashing down on me. 5 days. I had 5 days to raise an impossible amount of money. My first thought was the bank. I had never taken out a loan before, but surely, with my steady job and decent credit, they would help me out. I was wrong. "Given the amount you're requesting and the urgency of your timeline, I'm afraid we can't approve this loan," the banker said, offering me a tight-lipped smile that did nothing to soften the blow. I left the bank feeling like I had already lost. But I wasn't ready to give up. I called my sister first. She answered on the second ring. "Jake? Did you talk to the buyer?" "Yes," I said, getting straight to the point. "He's willing to sell the house back, but only if I can match his price by the end of the week." Silence. Then, a shaky exhale. "How much?" I told her. "Jake," she sounded pained. "That's... I don't have that kind of money. Do you know anyone who might?" A pause. Then, hesitantly, "Maybe Uncle Robert. But after what happened, I don't know if he'd." "I'll talk to him." I wasn't thrilled about asking Uncle Robert for help. He was the one who had handled the sale, the one who had never thought to check the legal ownership. But this wasn't about pride. I found him in his home office, a half-empty cup of coffee beside a stack of paperwork. He looked up as I entered. "Jake." I didn't waste time. "I need money to buy back the house." His jaw tightened. "I figured as much. Can you help?" I asked, my voice edged with desperation. He sighed heavily. "Jake, I made a mistake, I admit that. But that amount of money? I don't have it sitting around." I clenched my fists. "You're the one who sold the house. You owe me." He rubbed his forehead, looking exhausted. "I don't have that kind of money, but I might know someone who does." I blinked. "Who?" He hesitated. Then, reluctantly, he said a name I never expected. And just like that, the race to save my grandmother's house took an even stranger turn. Uncle Robert leaned back in his chair, exhaling as if he was about to say something he'd regret. "Jake, there's only one person I know who can get you that kind of money fast." I crossed my arms. "Who?" He hesitated before finally saying, "Gerald Lancaster." My stomach dropped. Gerald Lancaster. The name alone sent a chill through me. He wasn't family, but he might as well have been. He and my dad had been best friends once, back before everything fell apart. Gerald had built himself into a wealthy businessman, but his reputation was questionable. He had a way of making people feel like they owed him something, even when they didn't. "You can't be serious," I muttered. "I know how it sounds," Uncle Robert admitted, "but Gerald was close to your dad. He might be willing to help." I wasn't so sure. My father and Gerald had parted on bad terms. There had been whispers of a business deal gone wrong, money lost, and a friendship shattered beyond repair. I had no idea what had really happened between them, but I did know one thing: Gerald Lancaster never gave anything away for free. Still, what choice did I have? I found Gerald in his estate on the edge of town, a sprawling mansion that looked more like something out of an old gangster film. A butler led me into a study filled with dark mahogany furniture, the scent of expensive cigars thick in the air. Gerald sat behind an oversized desk, dressed in a crisp suit despite the late hour. His salt and pepper hair was neatly combed back, and his sharp blue eyes studied me with quiet amusement. "Jacob Whitmore," he said smoothly. "Haven't seen you since you were a kid." I nodded stiffly. "Mr. Lancaster." He smirked. "Gerald is fine. So, what brings you here?" I hesitated, then forced myself to say it. "I need money." His smirk widened. "That much I figured." "What for?" I told him about the house. About how my family had sold it by mistake, about Elliot Graves' offer, about how I only had 5 days to buy it back. Gerald listened, expression unreadable. When I finished, he leaned back, fingers steepled. "Let me get this straight, you need a significant amount of money, and you need it immediately." "Yes." He chuckled. "You Whitmores never do anything easy, do you?" I stayed silent. He let the moment stretch before finally saying, "All right. I'll help you." Relief flooded me until he added, "But there are conditions." Of course there were. "I don't give out charity, Jacob," he said. "If I loan you this money, I expect something in return. I braced myself. What do you want? His smirk faded. I need someone I can trust to handle a business deal for me. There's a property I've been eyeing for months, but the owner refuses to sell to me. I need you to convince him otherwise. I frowned. How? Gerald leaned forward. Any way you can. I didn't like the sound of that. You're asking me to pressure someone? I'm asking you to negotiate, he corrected. Firmly. Convincingly. And if you succeed, the money is yours, no strings attached. It sounded too good to be true. Gerald Lancaster never made clean deals. What if I say no? I asked. He smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Then you can kiss your grandmother's house goodbye. I swallowed hard. I had no idea what I was walking into, but I knew one thing: if I wanted to save the house, I would have to play Gerald's game. And I had 5 days to do it. I didn't sleep that night. I kept thinking about Gerald's offer, turning it over in my head, looking for some hidden trick I hadn't noticed. There had to be one. There was always a catch with Gerald Lancaster. By morning, I had made up my mind. I would do it. I didn't have a choice. If I wanted my grandmother's house back, I needed that money. And if that meant dealing with a man who operated in the gray areas of morality, so be it. By noon, I was sitting in Gerald's car, watching the city blur past as he drove. He was relaxed, humming to himself, like we were on our way to a lunch meeting. Who's the owner? I finally asked. Guy named Richard Hale, Gerald said. Owns a little strip of land downtown. Nothing impressive, but I need it for a bigger project. I frowned. And why won't he sell? Gerald smirked. Sentimental reasons. Claims it belonged to his father, that it's some family legacy. Something twisted in my gut. Sounded familiar. We pulled up in front of a small office building. Gerald shut off the engine and turned to me. Richard's stubborn, but he's also in trouble, he said. He's behind on taxes. His business isn't doing well. If you push him the right way, he'll crack. I didn't like the way he said that. Still, I nodded. I had come this far. Inside, I found Richard Hale sitting at a cluttered desk, an old man with tired eyes and deep lines on his face. He looked up as I entered. Can I help you? I took a deep breath. I'm here to talk about your property. His expression darkened. If you're with Lancaster, you're wasting your time. I hesitated. Richard, I understand why you don't want to sell. But I also know you're struggling. Gerald is offering a good price. I don't care about the price, he interrupted. That land is all I have left of my father. I swallowed hard. I knew exactly how that felt. Richard, if you don't sell, the bank might take it anyway, I said gently. At least this way, you'd have control over how it ends. He exhaled slowly. His fingers drummed against the desk. I had him thinking. I glanced at the paperwork on his desk. Overdue notices. Bills stacked in uneven piles. He was barely hanging on. I pressed forward. Maybe we can work something out. Gerald wants the land, but maybe you can negotiate better terms. I don't negotiate with men like him, Richard muttered. I hesitated. Then negotiate with me. He looked at me sharply. I'm not Lancaster, I said. I don't want to trick you. I just want to help both of us walk away with something. Richard leaned back in his chair, studying me. Then, finally, he sighed. Fine, he said. But I have my conditions. I walked out of that meeting with a signed agreement. Richard would sell, but on his terms. He would keep a small section of the property as a historical site in his father's name. It wasn't what Gerald wanted, but it was better than nothing. I climbed back into Gerald's car and handed him the paperwork. He flipped through the pages, then let out a low chuckle. Didn't think you had it in you. I told you I could do it, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Gerald snapped the folder shut and grinned. Then I guess it's your lucky day, kid. The money for your grandmother's house will be in your account tomorrow. Relief flooded through me. I had done it. I had bought back my grandmother's house. But something still didn't sit right. I had just made a deal with Gerald Lancaster. And deals with men like him always had consequences. The next morning, I woke to a message from my bank. The money had arrived. I stared at the screen, half expecting some kind of catch. But there it was, every cent I needed to buy back my grandmother's house. I should have felt victorious. Instead, I felt uneasy. Gerald Lancaster never did anything out of generosity. Still, I didn't have time to dwell on it. I had 2 days left before Elliot Graves finalized the sale, and I wasn't about to waste a second. I called Elliot's office the moment the bank confirmed the transfer. His assistant put me on hold for an excruciating 5 minutes before finally patching me through. "You really pulled it off, huh?" Elliot said, sounding mildly impressed. "I told you I would." He chuckled. "All right, Jacob. A deal's a deal. Meet me tomorrow morning at my lawyer's office. We'll finalize everything." I exhaled, my grip on the phone tightening. "Thank you." "Don't thank me," he said. "Just bring the money." That night, I drove to my grandmother's house. I sat in the driveway for a long time, staring at the front door. Tomorrow, it would be mine again. I stepped out of the car, walked up the porch steps, and ran my fingers over the old wooden railing. The paint was peeling. The porch light flickered. The place needed work. But it was home. I turned the key in the lock my uncle had given me a spare and stepped inside. The familiar scent of aged wood and faded lavender filled the air. Dust coated the furniture, but the memories were still there, lingering in the walls, in the creaking floorboards. I walked to the living room and sat down in my grandmother's old rocking chair. As it swayed gently beneath me, I let out a long breath. Tomorrow, I would fix this. Tomorrow, everything would be back the way it was supposed to be. But tomorrow had other plans. The morning of the final transaction, I arrived at Elliot's lawyer's office early. The check was in my pocket, the weight of it pressing against my chest. Elliot showed up right on time, as confident as ever. He shook my hand, sat down, and nodded at his lawyer. "Let's make it official." The papers were placed in front of me. I barely heard the legal jargon as I signed. The moment my pen left the last page, Elliot leaned back and grinned. "Pleasure doing business, Jacob." I exhaled. It was over. Or so I thought. Because just as I stood to shake his hand, my phone rang. I glanced at the screen. Gerald Lancaster. Something in my stomach twisted. I stepped aside and answered. "Hello?" His voice was calm. Too calm. "Congratulations, Jacob," he said. "I heard you closed the deal." I frowned. "How do you already?" "Let's just say I keep an eye on my investments," he cut in smoothly. "Now, I assume you're ready to return the favor." I stiffened. "I already did. I got Richard Hale to sell you the land." There was a pause. Then a chuckle. "Oh, Jacob," Gerald said, voice laced with amusement. "You really think that was all I wanted from you?" A chill ran down my spine. I stepped away from Elliot and the lawyer, lowering my voice. "That was the deal." "No," Gerald corrected. "That was your deal. But see, Jacob, when you take money from me, I own a piece of you." I swallowed hard. "What do you want?" "Nothing much," he said. "Just a small favor. Something I'm sure you can handle." A slow, creeping dread filled my chest. Because I already knew the truth. Gerald Lancaster never gives without taking something in return. And whatever favor he was about to ask of me, it wasn't going to be small. I stepped outside the lawyer's office, gripping my phone so tightly my knuckles ached. What do you want, Gerald? He chuckled, that same unsettling, amused tone. Relax, Jacob. It's nothing illegal, just a business opportunity. I wasn't convinced. Get to the point. You see, he continued, I need someone reliable to oversee the development of the land you helped me acquire. Richard Hale's little historical clause complicates things. The city's going to require paperwork, inspections, meetings with preservation committees. It's tedious. I need someone who can smooth it all over. I frowned. You want me to work for you? Let's not call it work, Gerald said smoothly. Think of it as repaying a favor. I help you, you help me. Fair, isn't it? I felt my stomach tighten. This was never just about the money. I glanced back at the office where Elliot was finalizing the paperwork. The house was mine again. I had one, but at what cost? What if I say no? I asked. Gerald sighed, as if disappointed. Then I'd have to reconsider my investment in you. And that would be a shame, wouldn't it? After all, who knows what might happen if I decided to contest that little land deal with Richard? Or, what if I needed my money back, with interest? My fists clenched. He had me trapped. I could fight him. Try to cut ties and walk away. But Gerald Lancaster didn't let people walk away easily. Or, I could play the long game. Do this one job for him, keep my head down, and look for a way out. I exhaled. Fine. I'll do it. Attaboy, Gerald said, his voice dripping with satisfaction. We'll talk soon. The call ended. I stood there for a long time, staring at the city skyline. I had saved my grandmother's house. It was mine again. But now, so was I.